Hi and welcome back to the channel where we do fun things with Swift, SwiftUI, and everything related to iOS development. If you're new here, make sure to hit the like and the subscribe button so that you're always up to date when I upload a new video. In today's video, I would like to talk a little bit about lazy variables in Swift. Sometimes you write code where you have a very expensive computation that you want to perform. You want to only perform it once, assign it to a variable, and only perform it when needed. This is a perfect example of when you would want to have a lazy variable. Only compute it once and only compute it when needed. There's other times where you need a lazy variable in which situations in which you want to initialize an object, but the object sort of has this circular dependency on itself, where maybe you're making an instance of a URL session and you want to give yourself as a delegate to the URL session, if that makes sense. I'll show you what that looks like in a moment, but in situations like those, you might actually want to say, well, I'll make my URL session a lazy var so that I can pass myself in as a delegate. I'll go on ahead and dig into a demo for you so you can actually see what I mean and so you can see this in action. Let's go. So let's start with a very simple example of a lazy var. If I have some kind of a class, and I'll call that exam results analyzer, and that object will have a let all results, which will hold an exam result, right? Or a list of exam results. And exam result will be an object that's defined. I'll make it a struct and exam results. And I'll actually only give it a single property for now, which will be a grade of type double. Or maybe I'll just make that an int. That maybe makes more sense. Or double, I don't know. Let's make it an int, I don't care. And obviously in the real world, an exam result would be a much more complicated object. But for now, we'll just take our all results list. And whenever we initialize this exam results initialize, or we want to say all results, is passed to it, and we'll keep a reference to that list of results. Now, if you were to compute the average grade of all the exams, you could write a function for this, right? Average grade. And you could return a float for that, or a double. I'll use double, I guess. Doesn't really matter. And then what we could actually do is go ahead and put this in a function. I'll paste in the implementation. For now, we'll divide that by all results dot count. Here we go. This is really nothing special. It's a reduce function that adds up all the grades that we have and then gives us an average grade back. We need to convert that to a double. There we go. And now we should be able to run our playground again. Okay, so we could do this, but imagine that this was actually a pretty large list of results, and imagine that we're doing something a lot more complicated than calculating whatever the average is of all our results. Then calling this function could actually be really expensive. And since our all results array is a let, which means we can't add or remove to it, we know that once we've calculated the average grade, it's always going to be the exact same grade. For this, we can actually use a lazy var in Swift so that once we've accessed the average grade and we know it's not going to change, it's going to be cached. And let me show you how that works. Lazy var average grade of type double equals, and we'll actually use closure syntax for this. So whenever we access average grade, this closure right here is going to run. And whatever we return from here is going to be assigned to our lazy var average grade, and it's never going to change after that. So that's really nice. We could assign a new value to it, but this computation that we're doing is not going to run again. So that's how we can use a lazy var whenever we need to cache something. Now imagine this. We will have to import foundation for that. Here we go. Imagine that we are creating an object class, myObject, and it's a URL session delegate. And we cannot conform yet. Okay, we need to inherit from NS object, that's fine. And let's say that I want to hold a reference to URL session right here. And whenever we init, we want to say self.url session equals an instance of URL session, and we want to pass ourselves as the delegate. Now I am not able to do this. Self delegate key, no. There we go. So we need to override init. We're just going to go by compiler error now to see what we can do. So here it's complaining self used before super.init call. So we'll call super.init. There we go. Property self URL session not initialized that super init call. And so this is where our problem sort of arises. We want to pass ourselves as a delegate, but self has not been created yet, so we cannot do this. We can fix this by defining our URL session as a lazy var. And using that same closure syntax from before. And I just like using that because it wraps things up nicely. I guess we don't have to in this case. We can actually say, I'll return a URL session from here. And now we don't have to override init either. So this allows us to sort of defer the initialization of the URL session property to the time that we access it. So we're not trying to prevent expensive computation here, but we're leveraging the fact that my object has to be initialized first before we can access URL session on it. And we're leveraging the fact that this value is going to be cached. So if we access URL session multiple times, we're not going to be reassigning it every time we access it like we would with a computed property. So by making this lazy, we can create our URL session once, pass ourselves as a delegate, and this will actually all work. One word of warning here, we made this a var, which means that if we don't prevent anybody from assigning to this var from the outside, we're actually risking some pretty bad API contract breakage, and we're expecting some strange results maybe. So I actually make this a lazy private set var so that we can only change the value of URL session from the inside. I would prefer to make this a let, but that would prevent us from making this a lazy variable. Because lazy always has to be applied to variables and can't be applied to lets. That's because whenever we access URL session on this object, it gets assigned a value. So accessing URL session mutates the URL session variable, or in case of average grade, accessing the average grade mutates the average grade, which means that we can only use this on mutable objects because accessing the property will assign. That's a little gotcha that you have with lazy vars that we can't really work around. So hopefully this helps you understand what lazy vars are, what they're used for, and why they're useful in Swift. You've seen how we can use it to cache expensive results or to make sure that we don't perform computations more than needed when we know that the output won't change. I've also shown you that we can use a lazy var in cases where we want to initialize an object, but we cannot fully initialize the object until later on, after the enclosing object is initialized. So in this case, we wanted to pass ourselves as a delegate for a URL session, but we couldn't do that until self was initialized. For that reason, we made it a lazy private set var so that we can create our URL session after my object is created, so that my object can become the delegate for that URL session. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, if you learned something, make sure to hit the like button. And if you're not subscribed, make sure to hit the subscribe button too. And I will see you in the next one.